I'm not going to add anything else to what Dr. Wafa already said about me. It fills me with immense humility. So I feel very honored to be invited to take part in this conference and to be sort of closing the event this afternoon with you. Right, okay, so let's get started. In the next 40 minutes approximately, I will be discussing the concept of the method and methodologies in second language learning using the lenses of critical pedagogy. One I feel very passionate about, and I hope I will sort of convey the same passion to you all. I will introduce what linguistically appropriate practice means and review the main principles and themes underpinning this framework. I will explore the role of the native language when learning an additional one. And finally, I will identify the characteristics of teaching and learning contexts embedded in LAP. LAP stands for Linguistic Appropriate Practice. Here goes a note of warning. I know that this presentation probably is not going to sit well with some colleagues. And if that's the case, that's absolutely fine. I believe that it is about time for us teachers to come together in this kind of forum in order to share different ideas and positions about what we do. And I think that if there is an opportunity to open up the debate on some ideas, then that will be fantastic. If you feel strongly against some of my points, please do get in touch with me, because I'm pretty sure that we can get together and try to find a middle ground so that next year we both can present a paper here and try to discuss our differences in a way. Okay, so I am going to start off by asking you, the participants, to probably write on the chat box what's your favorite or most effective method of teaching English or Arabic or any other language is for you. So you can think, excuse me, in terms of, I don't know, communicative language teaching. You can think of a task-based approach. You can think of audiolingualism. Any method that you believe is useful for you in your everyday praxis, please pop it in the chat box, and we're going to see that in a minute. Right, let's get started. We're going to consider the concepts of teaching method and methodologies. For a long time, the history of English language teaching was too preoccupied with finding the best method for teaching English, with the potential for this to be replicated over and over again in every single classroom, in every corner of the world, with exactly the same results. Now, I take up probably a critical stance in relation to this because of the following reason. Richards and Rogers, probably you heard about these two authors, explain that, and this is actually something very interesting. When linguists and language specialists sought to improve the quality teaching in the late 19th century, and I wish you to probably take this into consideration, the date is very important. In the late 19th century, they often did so by referring to, and this is another important piece of information, general principles and theories concerning how languages are learned, how language, the knowledge of language is represented and organized in memory, and how language itself is structured. So this is important for two reasons. First of all, because we have a date, late 19th century, and secondly, because there was an aim at the time of trying to find general theories explaining the nature of methods. By now, you probably know that the contentious issues that I am trying to discuss here is the validity of a teaching method as such. I believe that such a view was dominated by the paradigm of positive sciences, which was used to validate certain classroom practices, especially through an observation of different behaviors taking place in the classroom atmosphere. The cognitive revolution, which emerged as a reaction against a positivist paradigm, moved the agenda from the idea of a method as an idealized recipe to a series of competency-based methodologies, which are still very current and prevalent in some countries all around the globe. Actually, this is the case in Europe, where, for example, we have the Common European Reference Framework for Languages, which is in essence an example of a competency-based approach. Now, a further shift in paradigm that focused on social interactions and how individuals use language for different purposes brought about communication to the fore as the main goal of language teaching and learning. All these positions on the perceived value of a method and of methodologies by the same token was understood as systematic sets of teaching practices based on a particular theory of language and language learning. And I think that these have been seen as an attempt to standardize practices. And for many teachers, these ideas, a method and a methodology, is a safety net to fall back on in the pursuit of teaching excellence. So far, I presented my main thesis in this conversation with you. And I'm pretty sure that there are people who will not like what I am saying, and that's, again, absolutely fine. So if you have any questions, I am more than happy to have the dialogue at the end of the presentation. Now, a more contemporary view coming from the critical pedagogy claims that the idea of method is embedded in a colonial agenda, and this is actually very, very important, and in some pseudo-scientific postulates with, first of all, some obscure meta-language, seeking communicative and grammatical competencies, but without developing a clear understanding of how the brain processes linguistic information for effective communication to take place. What I am talking about is that in the last, for example, 15 to 20 years, we now have the development and the input of the neurosciences, and we have a new understanding of the mechanisms of the brain. So, with the new input from the neurosciences, my question is, do we really need to remain held back by the idea of a method or a methodology, or can we create our own methods and methodology? Something for you and for me to think about. Moving on. The problem with this view of methods is both the breadth and the scope of the concept, as it is restrictive. And given the fact that it seeks standardization, it stifles creativity and innovative practices. Similarly, a method assumes that learners are blank slates or empty vessels, that they are clones in a way of a good prototypical language learner operating in an idealized instructional context. It is evident that this view overlooks the linguistic and cultural capital that both learners and instructors bring with them into the classroom. Again, according to the critical pedagogy, the classroom is not a static environment where learning is guaranteed, but an ecosystem where different individual and group dynamics are constantly at play. Therefore, the classroom is a living space, and traditional views on the method ignore the affordances provided by other similar contexts where learners also operate as part of their daily life. It has taken some time for the educational community worldwide to understand that both teachers and learners are all unique individuals, and that diversity is, in essence, what defines us all in any social group, including classrooms. So consequently, to think about methods and methodologies as the panacea to solve such old problems such as learners' minimal engagement. This is something that I hear often and often every time I speak to teachers. Lack of progress in communicative competence, and even new ones, for example, super diversity, is far too simplistic, because what works for some groups may not necessarily work as well for others. So, just to summarize my point, I really love this cartoon because I believe it represents what I'm trying to say here. We are all unique in our own ways, and therefore we learn things, we apprehend new meanings and new forms of knowledge in many different ways. Right. Um, It has also become undeniable that classrooms are not immune to the new geopolitical configurations that characterize current societies. Advances in technology, amongst others, have shrunk distances and have turned the world into a small global village. And with the permanent displacements of peoples all throughout the world, individuals are likely to be competent in at least one language apart from their own, thus making monolingualism an exception rather than the norm. When viewing the classroom as a physical space for learning, it is interesting to consider that from a sociological perspective, cultural and linguistic diversity are the defining phenomenon of some contemporary learning environments, especially where languages are in contact. Now, the cognitive turn in second language acquisition theory made a valuable contribution in understanding how individuals come to acquire additional languages by acknowledging that there is a multitude of variables, both individuals and contextuals, that influence learning, either positively or otherwise. This is also acknowledged by recent studies in neurosciences, which have provided researchers and teachers with very insightful views on, for example, neurodiversity, preferred learning styles, and the identification of barriers to learning, which contributed to raising awareness of various unique needs in language learning. As described so far, the classroom landscape is a complex environment where diversity at different levels becomes a salient feature. It is also important to acknowledge the nature of personal relationships that take place in this physical environment. And just to mention one, the aspect of relatedness. Whilst traditionally a unidirectional relationship was prevalent, that the teacher at the front in their position of power and that of the students on their tables being passive recipient, it is imperative to think that a group of learners is a body where hundreds of relationships take place, and therefore it is no longer possible to sustain unidirectionality as a primary teaching approach. As a group, learners grow shared cognition, and this is important, shared cognition that provides new affordances for language learning and different types of learning to develop. Now, the 21st century classroom is quite different from the one imagined by the proponents of the method back then in the 19th century, when the idea was to use one single theory to standardized practice. So the question that is pertinent to ask is, what are we, language teachers, doing to respond to the challenges presented by linguistic diversity? I am going to talk very generally about this framework of linguistic appropriate practice. And to put it into a context, it is necessary to say that this is an approach used by many different schools throughout the world, whereby, for example, new learners coming into mainstream school, they need to learn the language of instruction of the particular system of education. In this case, it can be English as an additional language, it can be Arabic, it can be any other language, but within the educational system. Nonetheless, I believe that this framework of linguistic appropriate practice can be applied equally to any type of language instruction. So let's see what this is all about. Linguistically appropriate practice is a theoretical framework emerging from the research of Roma Schumack-Horbash, who looked into the educational provision of immigrant children in the early years context in Canada. Initially, the focus of her research was the way in which these children incorporated the new language, but in a different or from a different perspective. And this is the perspective, from the perspective of bilingual education. The research outcomes were systematized in 6 principles. We will look at them in a minute. And the framework starts with the identification of classroom practices contributing to the development of English, whilst encouraging learners to use their native language or languages actively. I'm going to stop here, and I am going to ask you to tell us if you use the mother tongue when, for example, teaching English or Arabic or any other language that you might teach. The question is, do you use the mother tongue? And if the question is yes, can you give us some examples? If you can put your answers in the chat box, that's going to be really very, very interesting. I carry on as you do that. So, linguistically, in this context, means alternating the learner's first language and the target one. Appropriate refers to the identification of language needs so that the teacher can plan and pitch lessons not only at the right level, but also at the level of interest of the learners. Practice refers to the development of teachers' pedagogical knowledge, in other words, the knowledge of how to plan differentiated tasks according to the learner's needs. And I'm going to stop here just to acknowledge that all throughout this conference, I was very, very pleased because many of the speakers emphasized the learner's needs. For example, Dr. Newby, in his exposition about cognitive grammar, he talked about the needs of the learners. And I also heard very, very interesting presentations where the same theme cropped up over and over again. And I feel so pleased that we are thinking about the learner's needs. This is fantastic. One criticism to this framework of linguistically appropriate practice is the meaning of the word appropriate, since this is a loose term. The appropriateness of practice is unique to, first of all, each environment, the learners, and the purpose of instruction. So what is appropriate practice for one teacher may not be so for another one. So in summary, this framework focuses on the classroom activities that the teacher designs based on needs analysis. Now, the framework of linguistically appropriate practice is probably a refinement of a previous one, emerging from the research of Tamara Lucas and Ana Maria Villegas in the United States in 2011. Lucas and Villegas focused on language diversity and the educational provision of students in elementary and secondary education. In the paper that resulted, well, actually it's a book and it's a very interesting book to read, they distilled 6 principles, again, the same 6 principles, which are a kind of a linguistic foundation for teaching English in mainstream classes with a clear focus on teachers' knowledge, skills, and teaching competencies. Linguistically, in this context, means developing the teacher's cultural and linguistic awareness, not only to teach the target language, but also to develop the teacher's understanding and metalinguistic awareness, I would say, of all the other languages spoken in the classroom. Responsive refers to the identification of learners' needs and how teachers with a set of knowledge, skills, and competencies can effectively meet those needs. Responsive is then the use of the right strategies for learning. And this is interesting because learning here is not only referring to language learning done by the learners, but it also refers to the professional learning that teachers are engaged with. So the main focus of this framework is on the set of knowledge, which the authors call orientations, competencies, and skills that teachers need to address when meeting the needs of the learners. Now, the principles. I mentioned 6 principles. We're going to see them very briefly now. The first one is that second language learning is not simply a process of soaking up. This is, I believe, a reaction against the standardization promoted by the notion of methods tending to simplify language learning. Quite on the contrary, LAP sees the acquisition of an additional language as a laborious experience, because it is not only learning a new language, but learning a lot more than a language. The second principle acknowledges that there is a significant variation in the way in which students learn an additional language. For example, we know that some eagerly initiate interactions in the classroom and appear to pick up a new language very quickly. Others are a little bit more cautious and reluctant. Internal factors such as age, personality, aptitude, and motivation, as well as external factors such as exposure to the new language, willingness of the peers to interact, parents' and teachers' attitudes to the new language, language background and family socioeconomic status, for example, all affect the rate and the speed of language learning. The third principle indicates that learning a new language is a little bit more than learning to talk. It involves acquiring the skills at two different levels. On the one hand, the social ability to interact with others, and the academic side of the learning experience. Now, social language or everyday face-to-face communication, according to research, is mastered pretty quickly within, let's say, after 2 years of initial exposure. If the content of social language is placed upon personal experiences, then the learners find it easier to engage. On the other hand, academic language is impersonal, more technical and abstract, and takes, again, according to research, approximately 5 to 7 years to master. This level of language learning is removed from personal experiences and is complex and cognitively more demanding than social language because it requires a lot of higher order thinking skills. Academic language needs learners, for example, to deal with coursework, activities, and routines that probably they are not really very familiar with. And we can see that there is an apparent tension here between the everyday language that they need and the academic language that they also need, for example, to pass examinations. We're going to see where this tension lies in a minute. Let me move on to the next point. The two languages of a bilingual learner, and I am talking about emergent bilingualism here, work together. And there is a strong connection between them. While they may appear different on the surface, the two languages are not separate. They operate through the same central processing or cognitive areas of the brain. And this is probably the most important contribution of the neurosciences. In the right conditions and with the appropriate exposure, the learner's two languages interact and strengthen each other. This means that certain language and literacy skills are transferred across languages, even when they are quite different or when the first language is yet not fully developed. The fifth principle, let me show you the fifth principle on the screen, stresses the importance of the learner's home languages for their personal development. There are many studies who have consistently demonstrated that learners who are strong in their native language or languages will eventually be strong in the classroom language. Just to give you one example, Cummings, 2011, demonstrated that the home language builds up a linguistic foundation and sets the learners up for success. Bilingual learners, and this is the sixth principle. I don't know what I did, but it looks like my my screen disappeared. I'm sorry about that.
It's okay. Great. It's here again. Thanks.
Thank you very much. The sixth principle indicates that bilingual learners are flexible thinkers, have good working memories for storing and processing information, and can better deal with distractions than monolingual learners. Now, the seventh and the last principle indicates that using two languages in a single utterance and switching from one language into the other is very common and natural among bilinguals. Every time I have the opportunity to observe students code switching or code mixing, to me, is an indication that learning is taking place. However, I understand that this practice of code switching or code mixing is sometimes frowned upon by some teachers. There is a strong case here coming from psychology and from neurolinguistics. When this phenomenon of code switching and code mixing takes place, then there is a very strong evidence that learning is taking place. So I'm coming to the end of the presentation, and I have to summarize my main points. We can then identify the reasons for the value of linguistically appropriate or responsive teaching. First, our classrooms reflect society. People are diverse, groups are transient, and so is the school population here in the UK and I think elsewhere in the world. The second reason is that monolingualism is now the exception rather than the norm. This means that in those classes where teachers, for example, emphasize a purely monolingual instruction and where native languages are discarded, is pretty much like asking learners to shake off who they are before stepping into the classrooms. Now, the learner's native language or languages should not be seen as barrier for learning an additional one, but the linguistic knowledge already existing in bilingual or diglossic learners is a form of linguistic capital that teachers need to promote and exploit. So what is my take on this? Building on Schumack-Hortbach and Lucas and Villegas' research with a focus exclusively on teachers and teaching practices, I bring the learner's dimension into the model. The learners and the teachers learning together in a dialectic relationship. The idea of linguistically appropriate practice or teaching sees the learners with needs, not needy, but with certain needs. And it is up to the teacher to meet them for empowerment. And I think this word is really very important. Empowerment. In other words, the purpose of our teaching is to give the learners a voice in the new language. If this is the aim of language teaching, we probably need to develop the competencies for learners to be successful communicators, for them to be able to operate at the pragmatic level, and a very key 21st century skill, intercultural competence. But at the same time, we need to create a space, which I called the third space, for them to be able to develop their own voice in the new language. The third space is a metaphorical place where learners negotiate their new identity in the new language. It is a zone of becoming as they move from different contexts. For example, family, school, friends, and I call this the zones of contact. From the perspective of language policy making, this framework aims to bridge, and I love the word bridge, the divide between language practices associated exclusively with school literacies and place the language learner as an individual with agency in the social world. So, what does LAP look like in practice? Well, we need to release, I believe, as teachers, our automatic pilot. And don't be afraid to use our praxis, our professional reflection on what we do to identify what works and what is really effective in our contexts. First of all, we need to acknowledge that our learners come to us with their identity, with a language, and that they bring some prior knowledge about the world with them. Learners need to negotiate their new identity in the new language, and asking learners not to use their native language is asking something that biologically is not possible, as the language function in the brain operates in the same single compartment. Now, modeling and scaffolding are certainly very good teaching techniques, and the learner's first language can be used productively if a judicious approach is applied. So, for example, Ofelia Garcia speaks of the practice of translanguaging in the classroom. Cardenas Hagen talks about cross-language connections, and I advocate for transferable language learning strategies. If learners feel acknowledged for who they are, for the knowledge they already possess, and that the language they already know is put into use to get things done in the new language, then the problem of disruptive classrooms, bad behavior, and aversion to second language learning are likely to be minimized because the learning environment will be very nurturing. So finally, I love the theme of this conference. And I also love this particular bridge, which I am sure you can recognize straight away. Every time I go to Dubai, I need to go to that bridge because it's lovely. In this presentation, I have highlighted the limitations of a teaching methodology based on the idea of a method. And instead, I have promoted a framework that allows you, the teacher, to develop an inclusive approach where your practice is determined by the local needs of your learners. By local needs, I mean your classroom, your groups, and how you respond to them rather than by the principles of a method. Then this is the bridge I would love to build to meet the demands of diversity and promote equality in the classroom. Thank you very much.
Mario, thank you so much. Very engaging and nice presentation, and the ending is absolutely very emotional and catchy. Thank you so much, Dr. Mario. I would like to invite our audience now, please, for the Q&A session. A reminder, you can write your questions in the chat box, or you can raise your hand. There is an icon that looks like a hand. You can click on that, so you can raise your hand in order to request the mic to speak. Dr. Mario, I can see one of the colleagues, Dr. Sahar, is saying, I like the term translanguaging, and yes, it has been around. It has been mentioned often in this conference, right? Hanan is great. What you're saying is great. Dr. Mario, thank you so much. It doesn't seem to be that still, if there is anybody disagreed with the elements where you are uncertain if the audience will agree or disagree with that, Okay, Dr. Mario, now recently we started to hear about translanguaging being used in the class, right? Long time ago, maybe not very long time ago, but when we were prepared as teachers of English, and the first time we started to teach English, there was a red line between using the first language or the target language in the class. And that the red line seems to have to start to vanish, or seems to have already been vanished, to be honest. Many people started to talk about the role of the first language. Teachers started to be encouraged to use the learner's first language, right? And you have just said, I have written these 3 lines. I'm going to quote these if you don't mind. Okay. Asking them not to use their L1 in the class is as if you are asking them not to use something biologically they need, right? Which can absolutely make sense to me. Now, why I'm mentioning this? Because I would like to touch upon a challenging point, which really, as a teacher in the class, does not allow us to implement this approach very smoothly or in a comfortable way, particularly the attitude. The attitude of students, the attitude of the association that you're working for or the institution you are working for. Until now, many of them think that if you are using it, it is because you cannot do it in the target language. Or if you are an Arab and you are doing it using Arabic, you're doing this because you are not mastering English very well. Right? And I would like to hear really from the audience if they have been passing through this experience or not, because we are challenging attitude. Now, in talking about all of these creative approaches that you have been touching upon, where does attitude come? Have these been challenged? Or do you think that this is what is happening in the ground, but nothing has been demonstrated in research so far?
This is a very interesting question, Dr. Wafa, and I believe that the point about attitudes, it's certainly a very important one. I understand that there are many different educational systems around the world, different institutions, different schools, where, for example, they believe that the best way to learn languages is to use the target language. In this case, if students are learning English, then the instructions should only be done in English. Now, what is the challenging view to that one? Is that language and identity go hand in hand. We cannot ask the students to be one person with one language in the classroom and tell them, okay, now you're learning English or Arabic, and therefore your mother tongue is not going to be used here at all. Why? Because from the point of view of psychology, and as I was mentioning in my presentation, recent studies in the neurosciences tell us that the language center in the brain, which is situated in the frontal lobe here in the forehead, processes languages. It doesn't matter which language it is still the same brain compartment. So therefore, to ask students to, let's say, not to use their mother tongue is actually going against the biologically predisposition of the brain. Now, I normally say this with the caveat, and the caveat is we need to be very judicious, right? Very, let's say, very careful when allowing the students to use their mother tongue and up to what extent. Because I believe that the mother tongue is another resource that we have for teaching and learning. Rather than seeing the mother tongue as something which is not probably welcome in our classrooms, why don't we see it as a resource that we can actually grab onto and bring it to our classrooms? So it's a matter of challenging those assumptions that if we are learning English or Arabic, therefore we should use that language consistently. Now, that's not always the case. And there is a lot of, as I said at the beginning, there are loads of opinions against this particular view, but slowly, I think that attitudes are beginning to turn.
Right, thank you. And I can see Dr. Professor Ali Shahada. Are you ready to speak, Professor Ali? تفضل. Professor Ali.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Mario, for the interesting presentation. Very good talk. Thank you. Yeah, commenting and responding to your two key issues, the use of L1 in the classroom and going beyond a specific method or methodology. These are excellent views and positions. The point is that how to implement that in the classroom based on my long experience as a researcher and a teacher and observer. Now, when we talk about the use of L1 in the classroom, it can nowadays we view it as facilitating tool rather than hindering tool, like you said, which I agree with. The point is that, how much of L1, some researchers say approximately 5%, but when you go and you observe teachers, they range between 5 to 50%. And when we talk of going beyond the specific methodology to use eclectic methodology or contextually sensitive methodology, which is a great. What happens, some people come not prepared for any method or methodology, and when you ask them what you are doing, he or she says, I am using a contextually sensitive methodology and eclectic methodology, but they are not using any methodology at all. So I'd like to hear your response to both of these views. Thank you.
Valid points. I'm going to start with the last one. I think that the use of a contextual methodology-based approach is something that we need to look with some cautious in the sense that I would say for novice teachers, for example, it is always a very good idea to use traditional methodologies as a safety net. But at the same time, I think that we need to encourage the idea of reflective practice and reflective practice. Weaknesses and how can I remedy the practice in those ways. And I believe that adopting this reflective approach on what we do on a daily basis, using praxis, which is reflection on practice, reflecting on our teaching, we would then be able to create our own rationale for this contextual specific type of approach that we use. I think it's always a very good exercise to challenge teachers and say, well, I don't follow a particular methodology, and at the end of the day, they do. The problem is that they cannot articulate or verbalize or justify what they do because there is a lack, in my experience, of reflective practice. So just to answer that second point, I believe that if we are teacher trainers, for example, or teacher training as a kind of a lifelong learning experience, adopting the reflective approach is always a very good idea to develop our own methodology. In relation to the second point, how much L1 can we use in lessons? Well, this is a very difficult question. I normally, for example, tend to advise colleagues to try to use, for example, explanations in relation to points of grammar, where, for example, the students would be more in tune with elements of comparison and contrast with elements of the target language and the mother tongue. So I would tend to use, for example, the mother tongue when asking students to make some explicit comparisons in order to develop their linguistic awareness. And there are many, I would say, uses of the mother tongue as a kind of pedagogical tool. I am just only mentioning one for the brevity, for the sake of brevity and time. But I can share some resources for you all to see how the target language can contribute to scaffold the development of the target language.
Thank you, Dr. Mario. Thank you, Wafa. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ali. Now, I'll take one question from the comment box, and then I will get back to Sumaya. Sumaya, I can see that you're raising your hand. I'll get back to you just after this question. Right, interesting. Thank you so much. Dr. Hanan Al-Utaybi is asking, why is the role of L1 still neglected in teachers' guides and in teacher preparation programs?
I think that there has been a long tradition, and going back to the 19th century, that in a way has been sort of passed on generations in teacher training. And I think that that position of the importance of the mother tongue has been neglected to the point that it is now seen as something completely negative, something that shouldn't happen. And I believe that, for example, teaching manuals and that sort of, I would say, resources for teachers, unfortunately, yes, that tend to ignore that. So, for example, we have elements from audiolingualism that says that you only have to speak in the target language, and if you speak your mother tongue, then you are not part of the club. That's one view. The other view, for example, has to do with task-based methodology, where the use of the target language is probably the most important aim at the expense of, I don't know, some elements of language one. I believe that we need to refocus our attention on the role of the target language. And again, I am only advocating for a judicious use. I am not suggesting that we have to remove the communicative element in the target language in English or in Arabic, but we need probably to try to find the place of the mother tongue very judiciously in certain lessons and for certain purposes. Because asking the students not to use their mother tongue is, for example, asking you to take away part of who you are, part of your identity, and leave it outside the classroom.
Thank you so much. I would like to conclude with Sumaya's question. Sumaya, can you please? And after Sumaya's speech, I think that we can move on to the concluding statement. Yes, Sumaya? Sumaya, ready?
Yes, hi.
Hi.
Thank you, Dr. Rafa, and thank you, Dr. Mario, for the informative conference, all in all. I have 2 points to make regarding what you said earlier about our experience. My personal experience, I taught elementary through postgraduates, and throughout my experience, I noticed one thing. Using the first language or the mother tongue in the classroom depends on one thing, which is the students, your audience or your students in the classroom. With beginners, like we start at government schools in Saudi Arabia in 4th grade. So you get students who have been exposed to English earlier in KG, or they've been abroad, or, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or you have those who have zero background. So those students with zero background, I wouldn't refer to them as weak students or low achievers. It's just because they haven't been given the chance to be, you know, able to learn English like the others have been. So with these, I think in the very, very beginning, you have to use some Arabic with them, because In other words, if you're giving them, guidelines or the class rules, or you can use flashcards, but sometimes when you're giving them instructions, they don't understand what you're talking about. So sometimes you just have to say it in Arabic once, and then they get grasp of it. They get an idea of what you're talking about. Then from that on, they get used to it. They know the instructions you're giving them in Arabic, what they mean, and you immediately follow it up with English instruction. So then over time, you get amazing results, but in the long run, it's not a short time that you're going to get the results. No, it takes time and practice, you just have to follow up. So this is my point of view. You use it in the beginning or in grammar or where there is no way for them to understand unless you briefly explain it to them. Later on in 5th grade, 6th grade, onwards, you don't need to use it. With high school students, I didn't have a problem with that. With postgraduates because I used to work at New Horizon English Language Center, I didn't have to use a single word in Arabic, So this is my take on this. The other point, just briefly, I think what the doctor said, if someone is outstanding or good at their first language or mother tongue, consequently, they're going to be the same at the other language or the second language, or if they speak, many languages. I think this depends on if they have been given enough exposure to the other language. If not, they may not reach that high level. That's what I think. I don't know if you agree with me or not. And anyways, thank you so much. I enjoyed this conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sumaya. Thank you. Dr. Mario, two very big questions.
Thank you very much.
One is two very short answers. Yes, Dr. Mario, please.
Thank you very much. The brief response. I wholeheartedly agree with you. Yes, to both of your contributions. I believe that research, for example, has demonstrated that it is easier for a learner to acquire social skills quite easily between 2 and 3 years of exposure. It is more difficult with literacy skills and with academic writing, where we know the students tend to lag behind. And in relation to, the fact that if students are strong in their mother tongue, they will probably be strong in the target language. You are absolutely right. The conditions such as environment, exposure, and the quality of the input all play a part in the quality of the output the students will produce in the future. So thank you very much. I really enjoy the questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sumaya. Thank you so much, Ali, for your questions. And thank you so much, Dr. Mario. Definitely very rich and informative and very touching topic to us all, to be honest, considering L1 and L2 approach. Thank you so much. And with this, I think that we can come to our last and concluding statements. I'll make it as brief as I can. And I just would like to remind you all, please, that I know that many people have been asking about what about the videos, what about other things. I would like, please, to remind you that all the videos after the concert and the permission of our distinguished speakers, the keynote speakers, as well as our precious speakers throughout the conference will be available on YouTube if they agreed and they provide us with their permission to do so. And if you haven't followed us yet, please on social media, please do, so you can remain updated about that. And as you know, in every ALLT conference, we announce the call for conference proceedings. We already had ALLT 2020, 2018 and 2019. We posted 2020, but we are in the process of publishing one of the forums about mastering remote pedagogy. And in addition to that, we would like to remind you, please wait for the call for the proceedings to publish them. And hopefully we can publish this year in Arabic as well, in Arabic and L1 of this region, considering that this is a very biological need when we are using L1. So I'm going to apply what Dr. Mario has been, what I've learned today from Dr. Mario. So this is regarding our proceedings. In addition to that, as the people who know us by now, they know also we have got 2 forums every year in addition to the main conference. So please wait for our emails as well regarding the summer 2021 forum, as well as the fall 2021 forum, and these are 1-day forums only, just to stay connected. You can say that they are short meetings with everyone to stay updated about what you're doing, your research, publications, and most recent classroom experiences and practicing. Of course, we cannot finish up a conference like this without giving a very big thank you to a wonderful group of people. These are the people who have been working very hard since 2019 to arrive at this point. So these are our list of colleagues who actually contributed in different capacities from A to Z in the conference. So thank you so much to each and every single one of you. You are really great people to work with. Honestly, you are. And of course, our wonderful virtual room managers that you have been seeing around, they have been working very hard to make sure that the panelists are there, everybody speaks at the right time, slides are shared at the right time. They have been moderating the discussion. Thank you so much for spending the time and effort to do that. I know it has been a demanding process, but I believe it has been highly appreciated by everyone. And as I have noticed, it has been extremely successful. Thank you so much to all of you, our wonderful virtual room managers. And finally, I would like you as well to remember that we are going to have ALLT 2022, and I'm looking forward to meeting you, all of you, in ALLT 2022. And to be honest, we have learned a lot from our experience now, right? So when we are getting back to our normal life in ALLT, what we are going to do simply, and we hope that it's going to happen on campus, and it is not happening on, it's not happening virtually, although we are considering some virtual activities like maybe the forums, for example, because it's hard to travel to the UAE for only one single day. But for the conference, we really hope that we are making it, we are doing it on campus. I would like again to just thank one more people. I think you know who these people are. You can guess who they are. Do you know who they are? Don't tell me now, because they would be the most precious people, to be honest. And because of them, we have been working hard to do all of these efforts. And these are the audience. The audience have been available with us around since day number 1, participating actively in all the sessions throughout the day. All right, I think that I can stop at this point, right? Thank you so much, Dr. Mario, for staying with me until this time. The concluding statement for me is very emotional one, and you are the keynote speaker who is sharing with me now these moments. And thank you so much to all our audience. I would like to wish you all a wonderful day if it is morning at your end, or a wonderful evening if you are nearby in this region, because it is already evening time. Looking forward to seeing you all in 2022, and thank you so much. Thank you so much. Stay well, stay safe, stay happy. Bye-bye.